All right, we're picking it up with section 9.5, blood. Okay, now let's look at the components of blood. Blood consists of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and something called plasma. So if we look at the composition, most of your blood is plasma, which is kind of like the substance everything is floating in. Then you have the rest of the blood components, which would be the red blood cells, white blood cells, and your platelets. Now, when we look at these, we can look at their structures. So for your red blood cell, this should be a review. It is a biconcave disc shape containing no nucleus, but plenty of the protein hemoglobin, which is what helps your oxygen bind to it. White blood cells, large cells containing a big nucleus, and different types have slightly different structures and functions. We'll specifically look at the lymphocyte and the phagocyte. Platelets are small and very, very tiny fragments of cells, and these are going to be important for blood clotting, which we'll describe here in a few minutes. And then the plasma, it's that straw-colored liquid. So if we looked at kind of an image or depiction, the white part would be your plasma. These red disc shapes are your red blood cells. Tiny little fragments are your platelets, and then your white blood cells are much larger, and you can see lobed nucleus here. Okay, now let's look at types of white blood cells for a moment. White blood cells are part of your immune system. So this should be a review from that, all of your notes and information on pathogens and immunity. But we have two types of white blood cells, phagocytes and lymphocytes. Phagocytes carry out something called phagocytosis, which is where different pathogens are completely engulfed and digested to break them down and get them out of your body. So you can see the lobed nucleus of a white blood cell here that's capable of phagocytosis. So that pathogen is going to start to be surrounded by the white blood cell, ultimately enclosed by what's called the phagosome. Enzymes would be released to digest that bacteria, completely destroying it. Okay, so that's a phagocyte. On the other side of things, we have what's called the lymphocyte, which they produce the antibodies. Again, a little bit of review from the last unit that we covered. Ultimately, antibodies help destroy pathogenic cells. And ultimately, when we look at these, and I'll give you an image of this on your diagram that you'll use for today, these are easily recognizable because they have a large round nucleus, which takes up nearly the whole cell. Okay. Then we can go ahead and talk about the functions of the plasma. Now, plasma is important for really the transport of all sorts of different nutrients and entities in our blood. Carbon dioxide, digested food, which is like nutrients, think carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that have been digested. Urea, which is a waste product. Mineral ions that's needed around our body. Hormones, even heat energy can be transported by our blood plasma. Red blood cells are also in the plasma, which transport oxygen around the body from, of course, the lungs, everywhere that it is needed for respiration. And then white blood cells are in the plasma, which help defend the body against infection and pathogens. And then platelets, which are involved in blood clotting, which is where we'll move on to. Now, blood clotting, pretty simple idea. All of you, hopefully, if your blood clots correctly, have experienced having a scab at some point in your life where you've received a cut to your skin and then a scab had to form, so you didn't completely lose all of your blood from that cut. Now, when we have this process occurring, there's a very specific scientific process that's going on. Your platelets play a huge role in this. As your body responds to the cut on your skin, your platelets are going to release chemicals that cause soluble fibrinogen protein. So soluble, which means it's dissolved in the blood, fibrinogen, which is a protein, to be converted into an insoluble, which means it cannot be dissolved, fibrin. So fibrinogen will be triggered to turn into fibrin, which will ultimately create an insoluble mesh across the wound. This mesh traps red blood cells and therefore forms a clot. The clot drives, and that's what we eventually call the scab, and that helps protect your wound from bacteria entering it and anything else that may want to get in or, of course, get out. Now, to see this in like a picture form, here you have the wound. Your skin is broken, red blood cells escaping in blood. Now, your platelets are going to trigger that soluble fibrinogen to turn into fibrin that's insoluble, so it cannot be dissolved. That's then going to create this mesh, which are activated platelets. The blood clots are going to form because that mesh is going to trap everything that's trying to get out. Ultimately, as that dries, that's what we call the scab. So, pretty cool how that works. And that pretty much wraps it up for this section on the blood. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. Go ahead, make sure you get your diagrams done, and then move on to your CFU. You're doing awesome.